So we're going to talk about the way the colony grows. During the course of the first box, I want to make sure it's high quality before you get to a second box. We'll talk about growth assessment and what's going on in your colony and how to assess when to put the second box on. The actual process of adding a second box. We'll reiterate that you need to feed till they're full size. We'll talk about the timing of the second box progression and if you can even get to a third or fourth box. Fledgling colony to a full-grown colony is where we're at. So ideally, whether you're, again, starting with a package of nuke, there's a point where you're going to have to add an additional box. I'm not sure if your setup, we talked about different arrangements, 8-frame, all mediums, 10-frame. I'm going to assume you're running 2 10-frames. If you're running an 8-frame and I say frames 2 through 8, that's not going to make sense in a 10-frame box that does. So you'll have to adjust accordingly. 10-frame, all mediums, you're going to add a second medium quicker and a third medium right after that and split it in thirds. Hopefully that makes sense. I want you to look at how the nest is expanding. And ideally, you should see bias, which is brood in all stages. And I'm going to show you a picture of that, and capped cells. It should mean that once the bees build out wax for you, there should be eggs and larvae and bees growing in your box all over the place. And there should be plenty of food and things going on. And specifically what I want to call out is, as the bees are building foundation frames, they have open space between this face of the foundation and the other face of the foundation. And as such, they can build the comb any way they want. Now, ideally, they will build the comb nice on one side and nice on the other side, and the two come together and the faces are flat and great, but every once in a while, it looks like this. If you have bad comb, fix it. Don't leave it like this. Just take your hive tool, shake the bees off the frame, make sure the queen's not on there while you're doing it, and scrape it off and force them to build it properly. This is common, especially on the outside frames, and they might do it over and over again. But if you cut those 2 appendages off, this one and this one, they will eventually fill it in flat and straight. And you want them to build it from top to bottom, side to side. And if you have stuff like this going on. Now, if they keep messing the frame up, then grab a new frame and put it in and let them start from scratch. Scrape all the comb off. And maybe you could melt the wax of the comb and rub it on the face and put it back in there later. But don't leave it like this. You don't want this gap underneath the appendages in the long term. You really want them to build straight, flat, contiguous comb as much as possible.
Kevin, there's a question about whether the slides will be available.
Yes. The slides, and well, this is being recorded, so it'll be up on the YouTube channel. And we're going to make our slides available in PDFs. Now, there's a concept, run 10 frames. That seems intuitive, and I need you to understand that we told you to put a feeder in, but let me talk about this thing for a moment. Try to get this out of the way. Some beekeepers want to run 9 frames. You might have heard this on the internet. We tell you not to do that. We want you to put 10 frames in your box. They want 9 frames because frames lock up when they're not cared for properly and they're hard to extract. If there's 10 frames, there's always room to remove. When you're building comb in the beginning for the first part of your colony, you want to use 10 frames and keep them spaced so that they don't build errant comb. Some of the errant comb problem that you see is because of the fact that people run 9 frames because they heard somewhere they should. We suggest you stay with 10 frames. And again, this is only mentioned because sometimes beekeepers say it's better to run 9. In the future, when you get past all this, if you decide you want to run 10 frames or 9 frames, okay, but learn with 10, stay away from 9. So colony growth, you start on the left, whether it's a package or whether it's a nuke installed, the colony grows, and then it gets to the point where it's at number 2. Now this is a feeder right here. So you start with the internal feeder, they've grown across, they've got it almost all full. You pull your feeder out and you put your comb in. You're going to put your feeder aside for a period of time. And you're going to wait till they build frames 2 through 9, complete 80%. The reason you remove it is you want that last frame built. If you remove the feeder and put the next box on, they'll never build that frame out there. Now, once you get your box 80% full, and I mean, it should be both sides of the 2 and 9. Understand this is frame 2 and this is frame 9, not the inside, but the outside. And they should hopefully start building on 1 and 10. Then you're going to take the step to swap them out, and I'll show you, okay? So when 2 and 8 have bees all the way across and they're building the box, that's when you make this manipulation. Don't be so eager to put the second box on that you cheat them of this. You want to have full contiguous comb all the way through, and if you go too early, they may never build those outside frames. So ideally in frame 2 and 8, you want some storage of stuff, especially on the outside face. If they're crowded, that's okay. They're not going to swarm on you. They're going to stay in the box. They're still building out. So it looks something like this. Your frame 1 is empty, your frame 10 is empty, or they haven't really done much with it. You're going to take frame number 1 and you're going to move it in. You're going to take frame number 10 and you're going to move it in. That's what this little swap means. If you move frames of foundation closer to the inside, the bees will build them, and you'll have drawn comb to the outside. You wait a little bit till they start on those 2 frames, maybe a day or 2, and then you put your second box on the roof. Second box gets the feeder now. So you've moved the feeder from position 1 in the bottom box to position 1 in the top box. If they don't fully build out in the last shot, 2 and 9, it's okay. They will eventually. But don't leave the empty frames on the outside and put the second box on. Chances are they may never get to them. So we want the bees to build out frame 1 and 10. You remove the feeder from the bottom box and place it aside. You move 2 to position 1 and 1 to position 2 and swap 9 and 10. And again, you're trying to get it closer to the brood. And then put your second box on and feed your feeder, fill your feeder. There is one thing that sometimes will help once they get going is to bring, if you find that you cannot get them to move up into the second box, into the foundation after an inspection, you can take a frame from the bottom and move it up to the center. I don't think you have to do this, but there's a lot of common sense instruction out in the web that says to do this. So I know people have heard it. So I'm going to cover it just so you don't have to ask me, is it a good idea to bring comb up? Yeah, it's okay. You could do this, or you could leave it be. Chances are, in the height of the season, the way we are right now, with everything in full bloom, they're going to come up and get to work really quickly on that second box. This probably is not necessary. If for some reason you inspect and then you go back the next week and you inspect and it's not happening, you can do this. I wanted to show this option. We recommended that you get a hive top feeder. On the right is the conventional internal feeder, but at the point where the weather switches to warm at night and warm during the day, AKA this week, you could switch your feeder. In this case, you'll take the internal feeder out and you'll put 10 frames in the top box and you'll put your hive top feeder on the top and you'll commence feeding them from the top. The advantage of this is you can take the roof off and pour the food into the hive top feeder and you don't have to open the hive. You want it to be consistently warm in the evenings. This is the week. We finally got there in April. Second box progression goes something like this. They start to build out above the nest. They build the full box. They start to store honey around. And when you get to the point where the second box is full, that should be the beginning of July. I say this all the time, hives are like children. They all do things in a different way. Some of them are going to build it out in a week and some of them are going to take fully to July and maybe a little bit longer. If you get to the point where your colony is fully built out, good. Put a honey box on top. Take a medium with foundation and put it up and see if you can get them to draw it. I've seen new beekeepers put that medium on, and not only do they draw the comb, but they fill it and they can harvest honey. We should be so lucky. So that's the natural progression. And now is likely the time when your colony should be through 2 and 9, if not in the next week or so. So these are out of order. I'm gonna just close this off and I'll stop and say, do you have any questions for me on that? And I can go back to any of the slides if you have something you want to discuss.
So question, can we ask question now?
Yeah, please, please.
Yes. So when do we stop feeding them? Do we continue to feed them?
You're going to continue to feed them, and I'm about to talk to you about feeding. I have a module to prepare because I know that
I'll wait
question
for
is
that.
coming.
And also, last year as well as this year, we should have joined this last year. We just did everything kind of blindly. Last year, we noticed there were ants going to eat the syrup. And this year, I switched to top feeder. I also saw the ants there. And the last year, the ants kind of went away because as we used some DE earth in the bottom of the ground.
Activaceous earth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
How many ants do you have? Is it a trickle here and there, or is it full
no,
blown?
last year was big, kind of almost big, almost like there's an ant nest in there. But eventually they went away. I think the bees took care of them. And
Yeah.
this year I saw some, but then when it got colder, they went away again. We haven't really checked this week.
So that if you, I don't know about you, but we have these little micro ants that come into the house every spring about this time. They are looking
Right.
for water and food. I will tell you that there's really not much you can do about it. You're going to find ants, you're going to find spiders, you're going to find centipedes. They like to hide underneath the inner cover or above the inner cover and under the roof. I found full-blown ant colonies on my hive. Now, one of the things I would say to you is you could prepare like a vinegar water.
Uh-huh.
If you go out and you lift the roof off and there's ants on there, just spray the ants. Usually the bees don't get in the area where the ants are. Spray them down with vinegar water, take your inner cover over, shake it off to the side. One of the problems with ants that I know of is where you place your hive. If there's ground area where plants are growing in any vicinity within like a couple feet, the ants
Right.
are in the vegetation and then they walk
Okay.
across and go up into the hive. So
Yeah.
if you have vegetation around the bottom of your hive, cut it back as far as you can so the ants won't find it hospitable to get across that. And
Okay.
ants are ants. They, we had biting ants, and when you took them up, they crawled up your arm and bit you. They were worse than getting stung by the bees. That's why I learned how to spray them with vinegar.
Vinegar. Okay.
Sometimes it's a lifelong battle. And if it really, really is a problem, there's ways to create moats at the bottom of your colony
Yeah, I
that the
read
bees
about
can't
it.
cross and they drown, but that's a
Yeah.
lot of work.
Yeah, use oil and stuff.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, thanks.